welcome to this very special broadcast. I'm Ridhima Bhatnagar. Transforming India. The goal, the vision and the road ahead. This is what we will be discussing over the next few weeks. Transforming India's soft power into economic strength. The road towards India becoming a $5 trillion economy. The role of India as pillars of democracy. Today we talk about the role of politics in addressing issues associated with controversial industries. Now, politics plays a crucial role in addressing issues associated with controversial industries. While it is essential to enforce and strengthen environmental regulations, establish stringent emission standards, and hold businesses accountable for their environmental practices, it is also vital to strike a balance between economic development and environmental sustainability. Collaborative efforts involving politicians, environmental experts, community representatives, and industry stakeholders are necessary to find solutions while supporting economic growth. So how can we strike a balance? Joining me is a stellar panel. Columnist Sohail Seth joins us, Dilip Cherian, brand guru, also joining us, and R. Gopalan, former Economic Affairs Secretary, Ministry of Finance, also joining us. Gentlemen, always a pleasure speaking to all of you. Thank you so much for taking our time and joining us for this special broadcast. Before we get into the nitty-gritty and the fine print, I want to kickstart by understanding from all of you, what do you make of the relationship of industries, businesses with politics? So here, let me kickstart the conversation with you. What do you make of the relationship between industry, businesses and politics? Can the two work without each other?
The more important question is, what is the tenor of that relationship? Nowhere in the world is business/industry divorced from politics, because politics is about policy. Forget the surround sound about all the other rubbish that goes around. But the reality is that politicians are tasked with policy, which then impacts industry and citizenry. So while on the one hand, for years we had crony capitalism, today we are coming into an era of greater transparency, greater scrutiny, and more probity. So what's actually changed is that industry also recognizes that it is no longer important to be in bed with politics or politicians, but it's equally important to understand that policies that are being made actually impact the economy and help consumers/citizens. I've always said, Ridhima, all my life that industry and politics are strange bedfellows. They can't live with each other. They can't live without each other. You know, Dilip is here. He's done all the work in this area of lobbying and, policy impact and all. He will bear me out when I say that there was a time when politicians were subservient to industry and vice versa.
Yeah.
And a lot of policies got changed and were impacted.
Sure.
If you remember, even the late Rahul Bajaj, after the licensing Raj was dispensed with, started the Bombay Club.
True.
We had a situation in our country where, politicians would grant favors. The granting of favors has gone because today even the courts are more activist in their approach than they were earlier. So I think it's good news. Okay. It's very good news. I think it's important to have politicians who behave like CEOs and not like, hoodlums. It's important for politicians to understand that business must be allowed to function unfettered, unhindered, and in a manner that is fair, transparent, and suits the economic compulsions of a nation.
Okay. Gopalan sir, where do you stand? How do you see the relationship between both the two?
Well, both have separate roles and both have to fulfill their roles. And in playing their role, there are other institutions which are there. There is a public order, there is a civil society, there are courts, there are regulators who are created to implement these policies in a manner that brings in for the common good of the people. Now, there are occasions when industries sidestep and go over, and there are times there are politicians who do really influence some of these decisions. So if everybody understands his role and acts accordingly, then there is a possibility that this kind of friction, this kind of lopsided results or situations will not arise. But the problem arises. And secondly, you should also, all these institutions, including government and industries, they must, act very transparently.
True.
If you don't act transparently and tell the public what is really the correct thing, I think public's faith in these institutions and politics and industries will go. So I think that is a very important aspect which we should all understand and work towards.
Dilip, would you agree with the point that Gopalan sir is making, that while nobody is denying that either can work without each other, what actually is needed is a balance and a sense of transparency that needs to come from various stakeholders?
Certainly agree with Mr. Gopalan on this, that transparency is perhaps the key. And transparency has had its ups and downs as far as the relationship in India is concerned.
True.
We have had moments when it's been very transparent. It's also been gone through moments when opacity is the rule of the day. But as Suhail mentioned, the idea of understanding what industry is doing, what it is pushing for, and recognizing that the pushing inevitably has to be done with government, or as Mr. Gopalan said, the other institutions like courts, regulatory bodies, is fair enough. But I think the key thing that we have to remember is that for this to work, there must be singularity of purpose. If the aim is, for example, that we want to raise people out of poverty, or we want to raise the total GDP, or we want to raise our position as a global trading powerhouse. These objectives must be clear, and then policies need to be made in a certain direction, and companies need to be left alone. Where I'd like to make a distinction on this is that it is best that politicians talk about industries rather than about individual industrialists.
Interesting.
That is where the danger lies. The idea is that policy has to, like Cleopatra's wife, look and feel that it is fair. It has to be absolutely clear that there is no fear or favor for an individual. It is a national objective, and that is where, if once that is set, the direction is pretty much one that is symbiotic rather than antagonistic.
I think that's a very important point that Dilip is making, that that distinction needs to be drawn. You know, I also want to bring out some data in terms of what is the kind of contribution that businesses or industries actually do as far as an economy is concerned, because we're talking about transforming India, we're talking about the roadmap to a 5 trillion economy. I just want to bring out some numbers to try and understand what is the contribution that we're seeing by businesses and industries as far as industry in India is concerned. Just look at the GST collection as far as the private sector is concerned. If you look at for 2019 to 20, it was 5.66 lakh crores. For 2020 to 21, it was 5.25 lakh crore. 21-22, it was 6.69 lakh crore. Even look at the Global Innovation Index. India is now at the 40th rank in 2022, and it was only at the 81st rank in 2015. So we've seen a big jump there as well. Look at ease of doing business. India is today, it was at the 63rd rank in 2020. It was at the 134th rank in 2014. So it has seen a jump there as well. Gopalan sir, and this is where I want to bring you in. As Dilip is saying that sometimes politicians forget to make that distinctions, while criticizing the work of controversial industries is what makes a democracy. But sometimes do we forget to make that very crucial distinction?
Yeah, we don't. I think many times we overstep that. Now, let me tell you the industry, or sterlite copper industry, which is Tamil Nadu, which I come from. The way in which the industry has been closed, despite the fact that there is so much of, mass of overwhelming data to show that they comply with all the norms, so much of demand from local people. There are about 4,000 people employed. There are about 500 MSMEs who are depending on the raw material from this. And so this kind of a change which makes in the economy, because there is an opinion, and that opinion is not managed by politicians, then there is a problem that industry gets closed. So the politics must know how to convey transparently. This would not have happened. Transparently information has been submitted by government agencies, by the regulators to the public. And the public also believe that these people are transparently putting it and they have faith or in the data they put out. Now, if there is no such exchange of views between these two bodies, obviously you will get into a situation where industries get closed. Industries will be controversial because some of them are polluting, but there are regulations and rules under which they have got to operate. And if these are stuck to, then there should not be a problem. The fact is that these things are not, allowed to dissipate properly into the public domain. And that is the reason why these things happen. And the politics takes a convenient seat they take to let the sleeping dogs lie and don't get into this. Let the industry suffer, and that's it. And one industry gone, it's okay. I think that is not the way.
Sohail, I want to bring you in. Now that we've understood as far as what the issues are concerned, the distinction that is needed, I want to understand the road ahead. What is the kind of balance that is needed to be struck between both the entities? Because this is what I said when I started, that it is essential to enforce and strengthen environmental regulations, establish stringent emission standards, hold businesses accountable for their practices. But it is also extremely crucial to strike that vital balance between economic development and sustainability. So what is the role of politics for industries and businesses, and how do we strike that perfect balance?
So, number one, there is no such thing as a perfect balance. That in itself is a misnomer. There's no such thing as a perfect storm. A. B. Ultimately, we coexist for the greater good. And the greater good is the people of the country. Sustainability, ESG, all these are bandied about, but they have no legs because the implementation in many ways is poor. A lot has been said about, the government's recent policy on the environment. So I don't even want to get into that debate. My seminal argument is that industry needs to recognize that there is a greater good than just profit. If you observe, Ridhima, for the last 10, maybe 12 years, a lot of companies have got into publicly talking about their CSR efforts.
True.
Because they believe that acts as a great buffer against crises. But it's also a great statement to make that we're giving back to society more than we get, or, giving back in great measure. Politicians are only there for self-service and nothing more. No politician will ever change. Their objective is to win elections. But today what's happened is the dichotomy that has come in, and, there will be obviously this divisiveness, Hindu, Muslim,
Sure.
Let that pass. The reality is people will seek development. There is a reason why Modi wins elections which have Lok Sabha linked to it, but doesn't win the state elections. Because people trust Narendra Modi with the running of the federal unit, which is India as a whole. The other thing is that I have seen of late many industrialists wanting to, meddle and put their fingers into this Bheti Ganga of politics.
Okay.
Comment on this, comment on that. That, to my mind, should never be done. Because it's a double-edged sword. The business of business is business.
Sure.
The business of politics is politics. When you intermingle the two, it's a lethal concoction. We have seen dangers in the past. We will continue to see those dangers.
Okay.
Number one. Number two. We are no longer isolated. We are part of the global community of nations. Whatever India does has a global impact. So we've also got to be cognizant of our role.
Sure.
There's no point saying we'll be president of G20, but we couldn't give a damn about the world.
Yeah.
More and more companies have recognized that it is a borderless world, as, famously Kenichi Ohmae said. So if you factor all this in, today it is not about dependency. It's about interdependence. It is about independence from the political front. And for politicians to understand that industry is no longer your cash cow. They're no longer people you can, get money from. Eventually you will. But it cannot be a quid pro quo.
Sure.
Because that will harm both the economy and the nature of politics.
Yeah, I agree with the point that Sohail is making. And Dilip, this is where I want to bring you in. While we're talking about the road ahead, while, Sohail is saying, and I partly agree with what he's saying, that there is never an ideal solution, I also have an issue as far as this entire cancelling of industry or businesses are concerned, because that seems to be the immediate reaction in terms of most situations these days. And the reason that I'm saying this is because I want to talk about a particular example. Let's go back to what happened in 2016-17 when there were pollution issues because of Tirupur dyeing industry. A zero liquid discharge was provided as solution. Now, if you see the kind of contribution that the dyeing industry has, it has employment to roughly about 5 lakh people, contributes to about 22% of total garment export in the country. The entire aspect of that protest was to cancel the industries. While protesting is a democratic right, downright shutting down industries, do we do that without understanding the kind of ripple effects that it can have on businesses and industries?
Very often, Ridhima, that is sadly true. The reason is that politicians don't any longer command the respect of the people who they represent. They are merely followers of what people's demands are. They are not the ones leading the people. That era of statesmen is unfortunately not at the moment at least an option available. Also, if you take the case, for example, of the copper smelter, which was closed down in Tamil Nadu, same reason. People protested, there was a firing, and as a result, the industry has closed down, resulting in a downstream damage to India, its exchequer, our ability to produce copper, our need to import vast quantities of it, and a whole range of industries dependent on it. Simply because politicians didn't understand how to lead the people into understanding what was needed, what was the pollution control that needed to be imposed, and how to make that happen. But there's also one more issue which we are forgetting. As the world is increasingly polarized into anti-China and pro-China group, across the world there's another movement which is to create industries which did not exist. So once again, politicians are holding the levers over industry because there are huge subsidy plays involved. So whether it is a manufacture of semiconductors, whether it is a manufacture of lithium-ion batteries, across the world, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in America, whether it's in India, we are setting aside mega subsidies which then industries have to bid for to get those subsidies and create those industries.
True.
So the road ahead is one where the road ahead involves subsidies, involves politicians and political policy-making decisions, and unfortunately also involves industries who have to vie to get their share of that very lucrative pie. So the world is changing. We need to understand it's not the simple world of yesterday. The world is changing.
Yeah.
Statesmen are missing and industries are lusting for profits. And that is unfortunately their raison d'etre. The only thing that has changed is that with the new ESG commitments that countries have had to make, we have, in a sense, imposed a value judgment or a value framework onto the profit motive. So let's see how that works. And I'm glad that politicians are being kept out of that because it ought to be measured in terms of the global good and the global harm where harm is caused.
Yeah. Gopalan sir, what I said a short while ago, because the pattern has been that if you're protesting, the end result has to be closure of a particular industry. But do we all now agree that closure of any industry cannot be the long-term solution?
Not at all. If you want to have development of $5 trillion or $10 trillion economy, and when the borderless, seamlessly industries keep moving, investment keeps moving, then we have to have all these industries grow in the economy, subject to all the restrictions and regulations which are for the common good of the people. Now, how do you do that? That's going to be a very tricky job. One is through ESG finance, which flows across the border in a manner that recognizes the sustainability and environmental and social values. That is one way how that money flows into which industries. That will give a good indicator of which industries are adhering to the ESG, and therefore that is possible for people to get to know who are observing this. So that is externally driven. Internally driven, what we need to do is the people have to have faith in the institutions they are dealing with, like the regulators, basically, because I don't know how people trust the politicians. They are not, and it will take a long time before the trust goes up. So we have to have institutions which conduct these regulations, getting people whom people can trust. For instance, you may make a very wide choice, wide search involving the public in selecting people for these institutions.
Yeah.
Ensure that you pay them very well, and post this institution job, you ensure that they don't get any other government job. Now, if you follow this kind of a principle, you can have institution staffed with people of caliber, morals, and ability, and they will ensure that many of the things which are happening will not take place. But those institutions then function very, very transparently.
Yeah.
Unless they do that, and unless they make the government function transparently as an offshoot of this, the kind of way to start with this will be missed.
Yeah, so we've come back to where we started. This is what Dilip had started with, that transparency is the way to go forward if both entities need to function without any friction. As I begin to wrap the discussion, Sohail, I want to begin with you to understand, give me 2 ways that you would like to see changes in this relationship between how businesses and industries tackle politician and politics, and how politicians and politics tackle industries, both ways.
Never get into a fight with a pig. You get dirty and the pig enjoys it. Politicians and industry must be in silos. They should only meet when there is a greater national cause on which there's cooperation, there's contribution. But for politicians to meddle in industry or vice versa is the worst thing you could do. The second is industry must recognize that there will be populism at the heart of certain political movement, oblique policies. That has to be understood in context. That cannot be used to either negate or propagate some level of agenda on behalf of individual industrialists or individual industries. The thing, Ridhima, is that for far too long, it was easy to get your way.
Yeah.
That getting your way has shut because people are more aware. There is social media. There's anonymity, so you can't even be sued. People are coming out with more and more tales. There's a whistleblower policy in place. It is no longer the industry of yore. It is no longer ki, mulaqat ho jaye, or the word sifarish is irrelevant today.
Yeah.
It is about competence. Consumers are even more unforgiving. Earlier, you had brand loyalty, which existed for years.
True.
Today, consumers are switching. Boom, boom, boom. And as I said, it has become more and more anonymous, more and more egalitarian, and even greater in a democratic way. So the choices are more, and therefore the compulsion to perform becomes the ultimate compulsion, not the compulsion to please the politician.
I think that's very well put, Sohail, that because the choices are so many, the compulsions now are to perform and not to please. Dilip, I'll give you the final word, the changes that you would like to see if you want to see a more symbiotic relationship between both the parties.
The way I see it is keep these two entities at arm's length. And by arm's length, I mean close enough to shake hands, but not close enough to get into a fight. And I think the second rule I would put is that both politicians and industry must recognize, as Sohail said and as Mr. Gopalan said, that the truth will out. With social media, whistleblowers, and simply the fact that tales get carried, everything will out someday. So make sure that transparency and the rule of law prevail.
Transparency and the rule to perform and not to perish is the way forward to ensure that there is no friction as far as both these entities are concerned. I've completely run out of time. Always a pleasure speaking to all of you. Sohail Seth, Dilip Cherian and R. Gopalan. Thank you so much for taking out the time and joining us here. It's a wrap from my side. Thanks a lot for watching.